The dust-laden wind carried the sound of hoofbeats long before the wagon appeared on the horizon. Tabitha Montgomery clenched her jaw as she stood at the crossroads, her worn leather suitcase clutched in white-knuckled hands. This was what her life had come to sold to pay her father's gambling debts to a stranger whose land she'd never seen, whose face she'd never known. It was 1876, 3 years after the financial panic had ravaged the country, and desperation had a way of stripping away dignity. At 22, Tabitha had watched her family's modest Kansas homestead crumble beneath the weight of her father's vices. The drought had taken their crops, illness had taken her mother, and whiskey had taken her father's reason. Now his debts had taken her freedom. The approaching wagon slowed to a stop before her. The driver, a weathered man with a permanent scowl, barely glanced in her direction as he gestured for her to climb up. "You the Montgomery girl?" he asked gruffly. "Yes," she answered, lifting her chin despite the circumstances. "I'm Tabitha Montgomery," he grunted in response. "Get in. It's a long ride to the Quinn place." Tabitha hesitated only momentarily before hoisting herself onto the hard wooden bench. The man flicked the reins and the horses lurched forward, leaving behind the last vestiges of her former life. "Mr. Quinn expects you to earn your keep," the driver said after several minutes of silence. "Your daddy owes him a small fortune. You'll be working the fields until the debt is paid." Tabitha stared straight ahead, her throat tight. "And how long will that be?" The driver gave a humorless laugh. "Years, I reckon. Maybe the rest of your life." The journey stretched for hours across the harsh Kansas landscape. Tabitha watched as the familiar terrain of her childhood gave way to rolling hills and vast expanses of prairie she'd never seen. By late afternoon, they crested a hill, and the driver pointed to a sprawling property in the valley below. "Quinn land," he said. 400 acres, best cattle ranch in the county." The main house was modest but well-maintained, surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and fields. In the distance, cattle dotted the hillsides like dark specks against the golden grass. It might have been beautiful if it weren't to be her prison. As they approached the house, Tabitha noticed a man on horseback riding in from the opposite direction. Even from a distance, she could see he sat tall in the saddle, his movements in perfect harmony with his mount. He reached the yard just as their wagon pulled in, dismounting with fluid grace. "That's Daniel Quinn," the driver muttered. "The boss." Daniel Quinn removed his hat, revealing dark hair and sun-bronzed features. He appeared to be in his late 20s, his lean frame hardened by physical labor. His expression was unreadable as he approached the wagon. "You're late, Simmons," he said to the driver before turning his attention to Tabitha. His eyes, the clear blue of a winter sky, assessed her with unsettling directness. "Miss Montgomery," he said, his voice deeper than she had expected. "Welcome to Quinn Ranch." Tabitha did not respond, refusing to thank the man who now owned her labor. "Simmons, take Miss Montgomery's things to the workers' cabin," Daniel instructed before returning his attention to Tabitha. "Come with me." He turned without waiting for a response, leaving Tabitha little choice but to follow. They walked in silence toward the main house, his long strides forcing her to hurry to keep pace. "Your father owes me $3,000, he said without preamble as they reached the porch. "That's a substantial sum." "I'm aware," Tabitha replied stiffly, "and I understand I'm to work in your fields to pay it off." Daniel stopped and turned to face her. "That was the arrangement with your father, yes. Then I should get started. I assume you'll want me to begin immediately." Something flickered in Daniel's eyes, perhaps surprise at her directness. "Actually, Miss Montgomery, I've reconsidered that arrangement." He studied her for a moment. "You'll work beside me instead. Tabitha frowned, confusion replacing her defiance. Beside you, I don't understand. I need help managing the household affairs. Someone literate who can keep records, handle correspondence, and assist with the accounts. You want me as some sort of secretary? I want you as a partner in running this ranch, he corrected. The fields have enough hands. What I lack is someone with sense and education to help with the business end of things. Tabitha regarded him suspiciously. My father said nothing about this. Your father wasn't in a position to dictate terms, Daniel replied evenly. And frankly, neither are you. But I'm offering you better conditions than you might have expected. You'll have your own room in the main house rather than the workers' cabin, regular meals, and work that won't break your back. Why? Tabitha demanded, unable to keep the suspicion from her voice. What do you expect in return? Daniel's expression hardened. Only your labor, Miss Montgomery, nothing more. Despite what you may think, I'm not in the habit of taking advantage of women in difficult circumstances. Tabitha felt a flush of shame at the implication of her question, but she maintained her composure. Very well. When do I begin? Tomorrow morning. For now, I'll show you to your room. The interior of the house was unexpectedly refined for a bachelor rancher. Simple but quality furnishings, clean floors, and an overall sense of order surprised Tabitha as Daniel led her up a narrow staircase to the second floor. This will be your room, he said, opening a door to a modest but comfortable chamber with a bed, dresser, and small writing desk near the window. Bathroom is down the hall. Meals are at 6 noon and 6. Tabitha stepped inside, setting down the small satchel she'd carried with her. Thank you, she said, the words stiff but sincere. Daniel nodded once. I'll leave you to get settled. Mrs. Peterson, our cook, will bring up your suitcase shortly. He paused in the doorway. One more thing, Miss Montgomery. I expect honesty and diligence. Provide those and we'll get along fine. With that, he left her alone in the unfamiliar room. Tabitha sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the reality of her situation settling over her like a shroud. She had expected hard labor in the fields, calloused hands, and aching muscles, not ledgers and correspondence. While grateful for the unexpected reprieve, she couldn't help but wonder at Daniel Quinn's motives. Men, in her experience, rarely did anything without expecting something in return. As promised, an older woman with silver-streaked hair appeared at her door a short while later, Tabitha's worn suitcase in hand. I'm Mrs. Peterson, she said, setting the suitcase beside the bed. Cook and housekeeper, you must be Miss Montgomery. Yes, Tabitha confirmed. Thank you for bringing my things. Mrs. Peterson studied her with frank curiosity. Dinner will be ready in an hour. The washroom's stocked if you'd like to freshen up before then. She turned to leave but hesitated. Mr. Quinn is a good man, Miss Montgomery, fair-minded. You could have ended up in far worse circumstances. Before Tabitha could respond, the woman was gone, leaving her alone with her thoughts once more. An hour later, Tabitha descended to the dining room, having washed away the dust of travel and changed into her cleanest dress. She found Daniel already seated at the head of a table set for two. Mrs. Peterson has her meals in the kitchen, he explained as she hesitated in the doorway. Please sit. Tabitha took the chair to his right, acutely aware of the oddness of dining with the man who had essentially purchased her servitude. I imagine you have questions, Daniel said as Mrs. Peterson appeared with bowls of hearty stew and a basket of fresh bread. Several, Tabitha admitted, waiting until Mrs. Peterson had withdrawn before continuing. How long will I need to work to settle my father's debt? Daniel considered this as he broke a piece of bread. At a fair wage for the work you'll be doing. Perhaps 2 years, possibly less if you prove particularly valuable. 2 years, Tabitha repeated, the time frame simultaneously better and worse than she had feared. And what exactly will my duties entail? Record-keeping, correspondence, supply ordering, payroll. I've been handling it all myself, but the ranch is growing and I can't be everywhere at once. He took a sip of water. Can you read and write well? Do you have experience with numbers? Yes to both. My mother was a school teacher before she married. She ensured I received an education. Daniel nodded, seemingly satisfied. Good. That will make things easier. They ate in silence for several minutes before Tabitha gathered the courage to ask the question that had been troubling her since her arrival. Mr. Quinn, I must know, why did you agree to take me instead of demanding monetary payment from my father? Daniel's eyes met hers across the table, his expression guarded. Your father had nothing left to give, Miss Montgomery. The land he used as collateral was nearly worthless, and I'm not in the business of sending men to debtor's prison. So this was charity. The word tasted bitter on her tongue. No, Daniel replied firmly. This was a business decision. I needed help with the ranch's administration, and you needed a way to settle your father's debt. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. Tabitha wasn't entirely convinced, but nodded her acceptance of his explanation. Rest well tonight, Daniel said, rising from the table. Tomorrow will be a busy day. The first light of dawn was seeping through the curtains when Tabitha woke the next morning. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was, but reality quickly reasserted itself. She dressed in her plainest work dress and made her way downstairs, following the scent of coffee to the kitchen. Mrs. Peterson was already at work, frying bacon and mixing biscuit dough. Morning, Miss Montgomery, she greeted. Coffee's ready if you'd like some. Thank you, Tabitha said, pouring herself a cup from the pot on the stove. Is Mr. Quinn awake? Been up since before dawn, Mrs. Peterson replied. He's checking on a new calf, should be back shortly. She gave Tabitha an appraising look. Did you sleep well? Well enough, Tabitha answered, though in truth she had tossed and turned most of the night, her mind racing with uncertainty about what awaited her. Good. You'll need your rest working for Mr. Quinn. He keeps long hours. As if summoned by their conversation, the back door opened and Daniel entered, bringing with him the crisp scent of morning air. He nodded to Tabitha as he removed his hat. Good, you're up, he said. After breakfast, I'll show you the office and we can begin. Breakfast was a simple but hearty affair of biscuits, bacon, and eggs, taken at the kitchen table with Mrs. Peterson joining them. Tabitha observed the easy familiarity between Daniel and the older woman, noting how different his manner was from the stern formality he had shown her the previous evening. Mrs. Peterson has been with me since I bought this place 5 years ago, Daniel explained, catching Tabitha's curious glance. She came with the house, you might say. Been cooking in this kitchen for 20 years, Mrs. Peterson confirmed with a touch of pride. Through 3 owners now. And the best of the lot, Daniel added with a rare smile. After breakfast, Daniel led Tabitha to a small room off the main living area. A large desk dominated the space, its surface covered with ledgers, papers, and correspondence in various states of organization. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on agriculture, animal husbandry, and business management. This is where you'll work, Daniel said, gesturing to the chaos. First order of business will be bringing some order to this mess. Tabitha surveyed the task before her. You weren't exaggerating about needing help. No, I wasn't. Daniel moved to the desk, shifting papers to reveal a ledger beneath. This is our main account book. Every expense, every sale, every wage paid should be recorded here. But as you can see, I've fallen behind. How far behind? Tabitha asked, picking up the ledger and flipping through the pages. About 3 months, Daniel admitted with a grimace. "Spring is our busiest season. Calving, planting, hiring extra hands. There aren't enough hours in the day." Tabitha nodded, already mentally organizing the task. "I'll need to know your system. How you categorize expenses when bills are typically paid, who your regular suppliers are." Daniel appeared impressed by her businesslike approach. "I'll explain everything. But first, I think we need to clear this desk." They spent the morning sorting through the accumulated paperwork, with Daniel explaining his somewhat haphazard system of record keeping. By noon, they had created separate piles for unpaid invoices, correspondence requiring responses, receipts to be entered into the ledger, and miscellaneous documents to be filed. "You've made more progress in one morning than I have in weeks," Daniel commented as Mrs. Peterson called them to lunch. "Organization is simply a matter of creating systems," Tabitha replied. "Once we establish proper procedures, maintaining order will be much simpler." Daniel studied her for a moment. "You sound like you've done this before." "Not exactly," Tabitha said as they walked to the kitchen. "But my mother ran our household with military precision. I learned from her." Over a lunch of cold chicken and bread, Daniel outlined the afternoon's tasks. "I need to ride out to check on the herd in the north pasture. While I'm gone, you can start entering those receipts into the ledger." "Think you can manage on your own?" "I believe so," Tabitha answered, eager to prove her competence. After Daniel departed, Tabitha returned to the office and set to work. The task was tedious but straightforward, requiring careful attention to detail as she recorded purchases of feed, equipment repairs, and wages paid to ranch hands. Hours passed unnoticed as she lost herself in the rhythmic work. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear Daniel return until he spoke from the doorway. "You're still at it," he observed, his voice tinged with surprise. Tabitha looked up, startled. The light outside had dimmed considerably, and her shoulders ached from hunching over the ledger. "I wanted to finish this month's entries," she explained. Daniel approached the desk, examining her work. His eyebrows rose as he flipped through the neatly recorded pages. "This is impressive," he said. "Very thorough." "Thank you," Tabitha replied, a small flicker of pride warming her chest despite herself. "I've almost completed April's entries. I'll start on May tomorrow." "You've more than earned your supper," Daniel said, closing the ledger. "Come, Mrs. Peterson will have it ready by now." As they walked to the dining room, Tabitha felt Daniel's gaze on her. "Something wrong, Mr. Quinn?" she asked. He shook his head slightly. "Not wrong, I'm just pleasantly surprised. You're not what I expected, Miss Montgomery." "What did you expect?" "Someone who would resent the work, who would need constant supervision." "I do resent the circumstances," Tabitha clarified, her voice level, "but not the work itself, and I've always preferred to be useful." A faint smile touched Daniel's lips. "Then we'll get along fine." Days turned into weeks as Tabitha settled into her role at Quinn Ranch. The initial chaos of the office gave way to order under her diligent hands. She created filing systems for correspondence, developed a schedule for paying regular bills, and maintained the ledgers with meticulous care. Daniel, for his part, seemed increasingly relieved to delegate these tasks to her, focusing instead on the physical demands of running the ranch. Their interactions, initially stiff with formality, gradually became more comfortable. Tabitha learned that Daniel had acquired the ranch after years of working as a ranch hand and foreman, saving every penny until he could purchase his own land. His loan to her father had been an unusual venture, prompted by a mutual acquaintance who had assured him that Thomas Montgomery's land would be worth the investment. "I should have known better," Daniel admitted one evening as they reviewed the monthly accounts together. "But I was looking to expand, and the price seemed reasonable. "My father has a way of making bad deals sound promising," Tabitha said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "He's always been convinced the next opportunity will solve all his problems." Daniel glanced at her, his expression softening. "You haven't asked about him since you arrived. Do you not want to know where he is? How he's faring?" Tabitha's pen stilled over the ledger. "I assume he's moved on to the next town, the next card game. It's his pattern." "Actually," Daniel said carefully, "he's in Dodge City. Got work as a stable hand at the livery there." Tabitha's head snapped up. "You've kept track of him." "I made it a condition of our arrangement that he find honest work. I check in periodically to ensure he's keeping his end of the bargain." The revelation stunned Tabitha. "Why would you do that?" Daniel met her gaze steadily. "Because despite his failings, he's your father. I thought someday you might want to know." Something shifted in Tabitha's perception of Daniel in that moment, a realization that beneath his businesslike exterior lay a man of unexpected consideration. "Thank you," she said softly. "That was thoughtful of you." Daniel nodded once, then turned his attention back to the ledger, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. As spring yielded to summer, Tabitha's responsibilities expanded beyond the office. She began to accompany Daniel to town for supply runs, acting as his representative in negotiations with merchants. Her natural intelligence and quick grasp of business matters made her an asset he increasingly relied upon. "You've got a better head for figures than half the bankers in Kansas," he remarked after she spotted a discrepancy in an invoice that saved the ranch $50. "It's simple arithmetic," Tabitha replied modestly, though his praise pleased her more than she cared to admit. "It's more than that," Daniel insisted. "It's attention to detail and a refusal to be cheated, both valuable traits in this country." Their trips to town also provided Tabitha with her first glimpses of the wider community. Riverdale was a small but growing settlement, boasting a general store, bank, saloon, church, and a handful of other businesses. The townspeople regarded her with curious glances, clearly wondering about her relationship to the normally solitary rancher. "People will talk," she warned Daniel after noticing the speculative looks they received in the general store. "People always talk," he replied with a shrug. "Doesn't make it our concern." But it became their concern the following Sunday when Mrs. Peterson insisted they all attend church services. Tabitha, wearing her one good dress freshly pressed for the occasion, felt the weight of scrutiny as they entered the small white clapboard building. "That's Daniel Quinn," she overheard a woman whisper to her companion. "And that must be the girl he bought from old Tom Montgomery." Heat rushed to Tabitha's cheeks as the crude characterization of her situation spread through whispers across the congregation. Daniel, walking beside her, must have heard as well, for his jaw tightened and his posture became rigid. The service passed in a blur of discomfort for Tabitha. When it ended, she hoped to make a quick escape, but they were intercepted by the minister, Reverend Wallace, and his wife. "Mr. Quinn," the Reverend greeted warmly, "it's good to see you in attendance, and this must be Miss Montgomery." "Yes," Daniel confirmed. "Tabitha Montgomery, my new business assistant." The clarification of her role was deliberate, Tabitha realized, an attempt to quell the rumors before they could take root. "How lovely," Mrs. Wallace said, though her eyes held a hint of doubt. "We're always pleased to welcome new faces to our congregation. Miss Montgomery is helping me bring some order to the ranch's accounts," Daniel continued, his tone making it clear the subject was not open for debate. "She has quite a talent for organization." "Indeed." Reverend Wallace raised his eyebrows. "Well, that's progressive of you, Mr. Quinn." "It's practical," Daniel corrected. Now, if you'll excuse us, we should be getting back to the ranch." As they drove home in the wagon, Tabitha finally gave voice to her concerns. "They think I'm that we're—" "I know what they think," Daniel interrupted, "and they're wrong. In time, they'll see that. And if they don't," Daniel's hands tightened on the reins, "then they can go on being wrong. I won't have your reputation sullied because of an arrangement neither of us chose." His fierce defense of her honor touched Tabitha deeply, even as she wondered why it mattered so much to him. The summer heat intensified as July arrived, bringing with it a drought that threatened the ranch's crops and pastures. Daniel spent long hours in the fields, directing the irrigation efforts and moving cattle to greener grazing areas. Tabitha found herself taking on even more responsibility in his absence, making decisions about supply orders and payroll that she would have previously deferred to him. One sweltering afternoon, as Tabitha worked in the office with the windows open in a futile attempt to catch a breeze, she heard the sound of horses approaching at speed. She went to the front porch to investigate and saw two ranch hands galloping toward the house, supporting between them a third figure, Daniel. Her heart lurched as she realized he was slumped forward in the saddle, barely conscious. She rushed down the steps as the men brought their horses to a halt. "What happened?" she demanded. "Boss was checking the irrigation ditches when his horse stepped in a prairie dog hole," one of the hands, a weathered man named Frank, explained. "Horse went down and Mr. Quinn got thrown. Hit his head on a rock. Bring him inside," Tabitha directed, fear sharpening her voice to authority. "Mrs. Peterson, we need help." The men carried Daniel into the house, laying him on the sofa in the living room. Blood matted his hair on the left side and his face was pale beneath his tan. Mrs. Peterson appeared with cloths and a basin of water, her expression grim as she assessed the injury. "Someone needs to fetch Dr. Miller from town," she said, pressing a cloth to the wound. "I'll go," Frank volunteered, already turning toward the door. "Hurry," Tabitha urged, kneeling beside Daniel. His eyelids fluttered, but he didn't fully regain consciousness. The wait for the doctor was agonizing. Tabitha and Mrs. Peterson took turns bathing Daniel's face with cool water, speaking to him in hopes of rousing him. Once, he mumbled something incoherent, but mostly he remained still, his breathing shallow but steady. It was nearly 2 hours before Dr. Miller arrived, his bag in hand and his expression grave as he examined Daniel. "Concussion, definitely," he pronounced after probing the wound and checking Daniel's pupils. "He's lucky the skull doesn't appear to be fractured." "Will he recover?" Tabitha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Most likely," the doctor assured her. "But he'll need careful watching for the next day or two. If he wakes confused or vomiting, send for me immediately." Under the doctor's instruction, they moved Daniel to his bedroom where he could rest more comfortably. Dr. Miller cleaned and bandaged the wound, left instructions and medicine for pain, and promised to return the following day. "Someone should stay with him through the night," he advised as he prepared to leave. "Watch for any changes in his condition." "I'll stay," Tabitha volunteered without hesitation. Mrs. Peterson gave her a knowing look but didn't protest. "I'll bring you some supper and coffee to help you stay awake." For the remainder of the afternoon and into the evening, Tabitha sat vigil at Daniel's bedside. She read aloud from one of his books, hoping the sound of her voice might help guide him back to consciousness. As darkness fell, she lit a lamp and continued her watch, periodically checking his pulse and breathing. It was well past midnight when Daniel finally stirred. His eyes opened slowly, confusion evident in his gaze as he tried to focus on her face. "Tabitha," he murmured, his voice raspy with disuse. Relief washed over her at the sound of her name, her given name, not Miss Montgomery as he typically addressed her. "I'm here," she said, taking his hand. "You're all right. You had an accident." Daniel winced as he attempted to move. "My head feels like it's been trampled by the entire herd. You hit it on a rock when your horse fell. Dr. Miller says you have a concussion." Daniel's eyes closed briefly, then opened again with more clarity. "How long have I been unconscious?" "About 10 hours, Tabitha answered. "You had us all worried." A faint smile touched his lips. "Us all, or just you?" The question caught her off guard, as did the unusual softness in his expression. "Everyone, of course," she replied, flustered. "Mrs. Peterson, the hands. The whole ranch depends on you." Daniel's gaze held hers for a long moment. "You've been here the whole time." "Someone needed to watch you," Tabitha explained, suddenly aware that she was still holding his hand. She released it and busied herself adjusting his blanket. "Doctor's orders." "Thank you," Daniel said quietly, "for caring." There was something in his voice, a vulnerability she had never heard before, that made Tabitha's heart beat faster. "You should rest," she said, rising from her chair. "I'll let Mrs. Peterson know you're awake." Daniel caught her wrist before she could move away. "Stay, please." The simple request, spoken with such genuine need, crumbled Tabitha's defenses. She sank back into her chair, allowing him to maintain his gentle hold on her wrist. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. Daniel's recovery progressed steadily over the next week. Confined to the house on doctor's orders, he chafed against the inactivity but grudgingly admitted the need for rest. Tabitha found herself serving as both nurse and ranch manager, dividing her time between caring for Daniel and ensuring the ranch's operations continued smoothly. It was a role she took to with surprising naturalness, issuing instructions to the ranch hands with quiet confidence and making decisions that would have normally fallen to Daniel. When she brought him reports each evening, detailing the day's accomplishments and challenges, he listened with growing respect. "You've taken to ranching like you were born to it," he commented one evening as she described how she'd negotiated a better price for hay from a neighboring farm. "Hardly," Tabitha demurred. "I'm just applying common sense." "That's rarer than you might think in this business," Daniel replied with a chuckle that turned into a wince as it aggravated his headache. Tabitha immediately moved to adjust his pillows, her hands gentle as she helped him find a more comfortable position. The casual intimacy of their interactions during his convalescence had begun to feel dangerously natural. "You should try to sleep," she advised, stepping back before the temptation to smooth his hair from his forehead became too strong. "I've done nothing but sleep for days," Daniel grumbled, though his eyelids were already drooping. "I need to get back to work." "The ranch is managing without you," Tabitha assured him. "Everything will still be here when you're fully recovered." As she turned to leave, Daniel spoke again, his voice softened by approaching sleep. "You know, I'm beginning to think the ranch manages better with you than it did with just me." The admission, offered in that vulnerable space between wakefulness and sleep, stayed with Tabitha long into the night. By the time Daniel was well enough to resume his duties, a subtle shift had occurred in their relationship. The formal barriers of employer and employee had blurred, replaced by something closer to partnership. They still addressed each other as Mr. Quinn and Miss Montgomery in public, but in private, they had begun using first names, a small but significant change that reflected their growing comfort with one another. August arrived with thunderstorms that broke the drought, but brought their own challenges. Flash floods threatened the lower pastures, forcing Daniel and the hands to move cattle to higher ground in driving rain. Tabitha stood at the window of the office, worry gnawing at her as she watched the sheets of water cascade from the sky and remembered Daniel's still healing injury. When he finally returned, soaked to the skin and mud splattered but triumphant, she met him at the door with dry towels and hot coffee. "The herd?" she asked as he stripped off his dripping coat. "Safe," Daniel confirmed, accepting the towel gratefully. "We didn't lose a single head." Relief loosened the knot of tension in Tabitha's chest. "You shouldn't have gone out. Your head is fine," Daniel interrupted. "And I couldn't ask the men to do something I wasn't willing to do myself." Tabitha handed him the coffee, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "There's a difference between leadership and recklessness, Daniel." He paused mid-sip, his eyes finding hers over the rim of the cup. "You were worried about me." It wasn't a question, but Tabitha answered anyway. "Of course I was. A second head injury could have been serious." Daniel set down his cup, his gaze never leaving her face. "That's not the only reason, though, is it?" The directness of the question caught Tabitha off guard. She felt heat rising to her cheeks and turned away under the pretense of folding the spare towel. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do," Daniel said softly, stepping closer. "I think you care about what happens to me, not just as your employer." Tabitha's heart raced as he moved to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him despite his damp clothes. "Daniel." "Tell me I'm wrong," he challenged gently. "Tell me you don't feel this too." Tabitha turned to face him, her composure slipping. "Even if I did, even if we both did, my situation here makes any such feelings complicated." "Because of your father's debt," Daniel frowned. "That's just business, Tabitha. It has nothing to do with how I feel about you." "Doesn't it?" Tabitha countered. "How can I know my feelings are genuine when I'm essentially in your debt? When my future depends on your goodwill?" Daniel's expression sobered as he considered her words. "You're right," he said finally. "The circumstances are far from ideal." He stepped back, creating space between them. "I won't press you, but I want you to know that my feelings are real, Tabitha, and they have nothing to do with any debt or obligation." With that, he left her standing in the entryway, her emotions a tumultuous mix of longing and uncertainty. The next morning, an unexpected visitor arrived at the ranch. Tabitha was sorting mail in the office when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Curious, she went to the window and saw a man climbing down from a battered farm wagon. Something about his stooped posture and the hang of his head struck her as familiar. Her heart sank as recognition dawned. Her father. Thomas Montgomery looked older than when she had last seen him 3 months ago, his face more deeply lined, his hair grayer at the temples. He glanced toward the house with the nervous manner of someone who knows they are unwelcome. Tabitha steeled herself and stepped onto the porch just as Daniel emerged from the barn, having also noticed the arrival. She watched as Daniel approached her father, their conversation too distant to overhear, but the tension in both men's postures evident even from afar. After several minutes, Daniel pointed toward the house, and her father turned, seeing Tabitha for the first time. His face showed a mixture of shame and hope that twisted something inside her chest. "Tabby," he called, using the childhood nickname she had once loved. Tabitha descended the porch steps slowly, her emotions carefully controlled as she approached the two men. "Father," she greeted coolly, "this is unexpected." Thomas Montgomery removed his hat, twisting it in his hands. "You're looking well," he said awkwardly. "I am well," Tabitha confirmed, avoiding Daniel's gaze. "What brings you here?" Her father glanced at Daniel, then back to her. "I've come with news and an apology." Daniel cleared his throat. "Perhaps you'd like to speak privately. You can use the office." Tabitha nodded, grateful for his sensitivity. "Thank you." In the privacy of the office, Thomas Montgomery sank into a chair as if his legs could no longer support him. I don't know where to begin, he admitted. The beginning would be traditional, Tabitha suggested, her tone more bitter than she had intended. Her father winced but nodded. I came to tell you that I've been working honest for these past months, at the livery in Dodge City like Mr. Quinn required. It's the longest I've stayed in one place since. He trailed off, both of them knowing he meant since her mother's death. That's good, Tabitha said, finding she genuinely meant it. I've been saving, he continued. Every penny I could spare. It's not much, but... He reached into his coat and withdrew a small pouch, placing it on the desk between them. It's $200, toward what I owe Quinn. Tabitha stared at the pouch in disbelief. 200, her father nodded, a hint of pride in his voice. I haven't touched a card or a bottle in 3 months, first time since I was a boy. The admission struck Tabitha deeply. She knew what demons drove her father to drink and gamble, the same loss that had haunted their home since her mother's death. Why now? She asked softly. After all this time? Thomas Montgomery's eyes filled with tears. Because I sold my own daughter to pay my debts, he said, his voice breaking. What kind of man does that? Your mother would have never forgiven me. I can barely forgive myself. Tabitha had expected to feel vindicated by his remorse, but instead she felt only a profound sadness for the broken man before her. Mother would have wanted you to heal, she said gently, to find a way forward. Her father looked up, hope flickering in his watery eyes. Can you ever forgive me, Tabby? The question hung between them, weighted with years of disappointment and hurt. Tabitha took a deep breath. I'm trying, Father. It won't happen overnight, but I'm trying. Relief washed over his features. That's more than I deserve. What will you do now? Tabitha asked. Will you go back to Dodge City? He nodded. The livery owners offered me a more permanent position, says I have a way with the horses. A faint smile touched his lips. Always did, even when I couldn't manage much else. They talked for nearly an hour, catching up on the months of separation and cautiously rebuilding the bridge between them. When they finally emerged from the office, Daniel was waiting in the living room, his expression guarded. Mr. Quinn, Thomas Montgomery addressed him formally. I've given Tabitha $200 toward my debt. It's not much, but it's a start. Daniel glanced at Tabitha, his eyebrows raised in question. She nodded in confirmation. That's unexpected, Daniel said, but welcome. I understand it doesn't change our arrangement, Thomas continued. But I wanted you to know I'm trying to make things right. Daniel studied the older man for a long moment. Your daughter has been an asset to this ranch, Mr. Montgomery. Whatever circumstances brought her here, I'm grateful for her presence. Tabitha felt a warmth spread through her at his words, at the genuine respect in his voice. She always was the smart one, her father said with a sad smile. Takes after her mother that way. As Thomas prepared to leave, promising to return when he had saved more toward the debt, Tabitha walked with him to his wagon. Are you happy here, Tabby? He asked quietly, away from Daniel's hearing. He treats you well. Yes, Tabitha answered truthfully. Better than I expected. I'm doing work that challenges me and I'm respected. Her father studied her face for a moment, seeing perhaps more than she intended to reveal. There's something between you two, isn't there? Tabitha looked away. It's complicated. Thomas Montgomery placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Life usually is. But don't let my mistakes keep you from finding happiness, Tabby. You deserve better than that. With those parting words and a promise to write, her father departed, leaving Tabitha to ponder the unexpected turn the day had taken. When she returned to the house, Daniel was waiting in the office, the pouch of money still on the desk where her father had left it. Are you all right? He asked, concern evident in his voice. Tabitha nodded, though tears threatened at the edges of her composure. I never expected him to change. After all these years, people can surprise you, Daniel said quietly, sometimes even themselves. He picked up the pouch, weighing it in his hand. $200 is a significant amount for a livery worker to save. He said he hasn't been drinking or gambling. Daniel's eyebrows rose. That is a change. He's trying, Tabitha said, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her tone. It's more than he's done in years. I didn't mean to sound dismissive, Daniel clarified. I think it's admirable and it changes things. Changes what? Daniel set the pouch back on the desk. If he continues to make payments, your time here could be shortened considerably. The words should have brought relief, but instead, Tabitha felt an unexpected pang at the thought of leaving the ranch sooner than anticipated. Oh, she said softly, I suppose that's true. Daniel moved closer, his eyes searching her face. Unless you had reasons to stay beyond the debt. Tabitha's heart quickened at his implication. Daniel, we discussed this. I know, he interrupted gently, and I meant what I said about not pressing you. But your father's actions today change the dynamic between us, don't they? If he's actively working to repay the debt, then you're less beholden to me. The logic was sound, but Tabitha's emotions were anything but logical. It's still complicated, she insisted. People in town already talk about us. If we were to, if anything were to develop between us, they would assume the worst. Since when do you care what people in Riverdale think? Daniel challenged. The woman who stood up to Frank Thompson when he tried to cheat us on the feed prices. Who faced down Mrs. Wallace's disapproval every Sunday without flinching, despite herself. Tabitha smiled at the memories. That's different. Business is one thing. Personal matters are another. Are they? Daniel stepped closer still, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. Because from where I stand, the courage it takes to stand up for what's right is the same courage it takes to acknowledge what you feel. Tabitha found herself at a loss for words, caught between the truth of his statement and the fear that had governed so much of her life. I'm not asking for an answer today, Daniel said softly. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that what's between us might be worth exploring, debts and gossips be damned. With that, he left her alone with her thoughts, which remained in turmoil long into the night. September brought with it the first hints of autumn, cooler nights and golden light that transformed the prairie. It also brought the county fair, an event that drew people from miles around for competitions, socializing, and a rare break from the demands of rural life. We should attend, Daniel suggested over breakfast one morning. The ranch could use some representation, and it would be good for you to meet more people from the surrounding area. Tabitha considered the proposal. Since her father's visit, a delicate balance had been maintained between her and Daniel, a mutual acknowledgement of their feelings coupled with an unspoken agreement not to act upon them until circumstances were clearer. I suppose it would be educational, she conceded. And Mrs. Peterson has been talking about entering her preserves in the competition. Then it's settled, Daniel said with a satisfied nod. We'll all go on Saturday. The fairgrounds were a riot of color and activity when they arrived, bunting decorating the makeshift stalls and pavilions. The air filled with the mingled scents of livestock, fried food, and sawdust. Tabitha found herself enjoying the festive atmosphere despite her initial reservations. While Mrs. Peterson headed to the domestic arts pavilion with her jars of preserved peaches and pickled vegetables, Daniel guided Tabitha through the livestock exhibitions, introducing her to other ranchers and farmers from the county. Quinn, good to see you, a burly man with a thick mustache greeted them. And who might this be? Elijah Dawson, this is Tabitha Montgomery, my business associate, Daniel introduced. Tabitha, Mr. Dawson owns the largest sheep operation in the county. Tabitha extended her hand, which Dawson shook with surprised respect. Business associate, he repeated, eyebrows raised. That's progressive of you, Quinn. Miss Montgomery has a remarkable head for figures, Daniel replied smoothly. She's revolutionized our record-keeping systems. Indeed. Dawson eyed Tabitha with newfound interest. Perhaps I should steal you away, Miss Montgomery. My accounts are in shambles. I'm afraid Miss Montgomery is quite indispensable to Quinn Ranch, Daniel responded before Tabitha could speak, his tone light but with an unmistakable edge of possessiveness. As they moved on, Tabitha gave him a sidelong glance. Indispensable, am I? A faint flush colored Daniel's cheeks. It's simply the truth. The ranch runs twice as efficiently with your help. They continued through the fair, stopping to admire prize livestock, agricultural displays, and handicrafts. Tabitha noticed that with each introduction, Daniel emphasized her role as his business partner, clearly intent on establishing her professional standing in the community. By midday, they found themselves at the edge of the fairgrounds, where teams were assembling for various competitions. A crowd had gathered to watch the horse races, and Daniel suggested they stay to observe. The winner traditionally has first choice of breeding stock at the auction tomorrow, he explained as they found a spot with a good view of the track. As they watched the riders prepare, a commotion broke out nearby. A young bay horse had spooked at something and was rearing wildly, its handler struggling to maintain control. Before anyone could react, the animal broke free, charging directly toward the crowd where Tabitha and Daniel stood. Daniel's arm shot out, pulling Tabitha behind him as people scattered in panic. The horse veered at the last moment, but its shoulder clipped Daniel, sending him sprawling to the ground. Tabitha cried out in alarm, rushing to his side as others hurried to capture the runaway horse. Daniel. Are you hurt? She demanded, kneeling beside him, her hands moving instinctively to check for injuries. He grimaced as he sat up, clutching his left arm. Nothing broken, I think, just bruised. Relief washed over her, followed immediately by anger. You shouldn't have done that. You could have been seriously injured. Daniel's expression softened as he looked at her. I couldn't let it hurt you. The simple statement, delivered without hesitation or qualification, struck Tabitha to her core. In that moment, with Daniel dusty and disheveled on the ground, his only concern her safety despite his own pain, something crystallized within her. Here, let me help you up, she said, offering her hand. When he was on his feet, she didn't release him but instead kept her fingers firmly intertwined with his. People were staring, she knew. The entire incident had drawn attention, and now they were standing hand in full view of half the county. For the first time, Tabitha found she didn't care. Your arm needs tending, she said decisively. Let's find someplace quieter. They made their way to a shaded area behind the refreshment tents, where Tabitha insisted on examining Daniel's injury. His forearm was already showing signs of bruising, but the skin wasn't broken, and he could move his fingers without difficulty. You'll live, she pronounced, her tone deliberately light to mask the lingering fear the incident had provoked. Though you might be sore for a few days. Daniel captured her hands as she finished her inspection. Tabitha, he said softly, you're shaking. She hadn't noticed until he mentioned it, but it was true. The adrenaline of the moment was ebbing, leaving her trembling in its wake. I thought, when I saw that horse heading straight for you. Hey, Daniel said gently, releasing one of her hands to tip her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. I'm all right, we both are, Tabitha nodded, unable to look away from the warmth in his eyes. I was so afraid, she admitted. And then I realized I've been afraid for months. Not of wild horses or what people might think, but of acknowledging what I feel for you." Daniel went very still, his fingers warm against her skin. "And what do you feel?" The question hung between them, a precipice she had been approaching for longer than she cared to admit. Taking a deep breath, Tabitha stepped off the edge. "I love you," she said, the words both terrifying and liberating as they left her lips. "I think I have for some time now." Joy bloomed across Daniel's features, transforming his usual reserve into radiant happiness. "Tabitha Montgomery," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have loved you since the day you organized my chaotic office and told me with perfect conviction that my filing system was an abomination." A laugh escaped her, part relief and part delight. "It was," she insisted. "No sensible person files receipts by color." "I never claimed to be sensible," Daniel countered, drawing her closer. "Especially not when it comes to you." Their first kiss was gentle, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened as months of suppressed longing found expression. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, Tabitha rested her forehead against Daniel's chest, listening to the rapid beating of his heart. "People will talk more than ever now," she murmured. Daniel chuckled, the sound vibrating against her cheek. "Let them. We know the truth of us. That's what matters." They rejoined the fair with their hands still linked, a public declaration that raised eyebrows but also garnered smiles from those who had watched their relationship develop over the past months. Mrs. Peterson, discovering them together by the ribbon display, merely nodded as if confirming something she had long suspected. "Took you too long enough," was her only comment before showing them the blue ribbon her peach preserves had won. The return to the ranch that evening carried a sense of new beginnings. As they sat together on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Daniel broached the subject that had remained unaddressed throughout the day. "Your father's payment changes things," he said, his arm around her shoulders as she leaned against him. "If he continues to pay, your obligation could be settled within a year." Tabitha turned to face him, suddenly fearful. "Are you saying you want me to leave when the debt is paid?" Daniel's expression registered shock. "God, no, that's the last thing I want." He took her hands in his. "What I'm trying to say rather badly is that when the debt is settled there will be nothing binding you here except your own choice, and I hope you'll choose to stay." Relief flooded through her. "Of course I would. This is my home now. You are my home." Daniel's eyes darkened with emotion. "In that case," he said, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a small object, "I have something to ask you." Tabitha's breath caught as she recognized the ring in his palm, a simple gold band set with a modest diamond that caught the last rays of sunlight. "It was my mother's," Daniel explained. "I've been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment." "Daniel," Tabitha whispered, her heart racing. "Tabitha Montgomery, I know our beginning was unconventional, but I want our future to be one we choose together." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me?" "Not because of any debt or obligation, but because we've found something together worth building a life around." Tears blurred Tabitha's vision as she nodded. "Yes," she managed through the tightness in her throat. "Yes, I will marry you." As Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, Tabitha marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. She had arrived at Quinn Ranch as little more than property, sold to work a stranger's fields. Now she was choosing to stay, not as an indentured laborer but as a partner, both in business and in life. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked as he drew her into his embrace. Tabitha smiled up at him, her heart full. "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst circumstances can lead to the best outcomes, and that I'm very glad you said I'd work beside you instead of in your fields." Daniel laughed, the the sound carrying across the darkening prairie. "Best business decision I ever made," he agreed. Before sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a future neither could have imagined when their paths first crossed. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Riverdale and the surrounding county. Some received it with genuine pleasure, others with barely concealed skepticism about the circumstances. Tabitha found she could face the gossip with equanimity now that she was secure in her feelings and in Daniel's. In October, Thomas Montgomery made another journey to the ranch, bringing with him an additional $100 toward his debt, and the news that he had been promoted to assistant manager at the livery. "I'm proud of you, Father," Tabitha told him sincerely as they walked together near the corral. "Mother would be too." "Thank you, Tabby," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "That means more than you know." When she shared the news of her engagement, her father's eyes filled with tears. "He's a good man," he said. "I may have made the worst mistake of my life sending you here, but it seems to have led to the best outcome for you." "It did," Tabitha agreed, slipping her arm through his. "Though I hope you'll stay for the wedding. We're planning it for spring after the calving season." Her father squeezed her arm. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." As winter descended on the prairie, life at Quinn Ranch settled into a new rhythm. Tabitha continued to manage the business affairs, but now she and Daniel made decisions together as equals. The upcoming marriage was discussed throughout the long evenings by the fire, plans made for joining their lives formally, though their hearts were already entwined. "I want to do something about your father's debt," Daniel said one night as they reviewed the ranch's accounts. "As a wedding gift." Tabitha looked up from the ledger, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I'm thinking of reducing it by half," Daniel explained. "He's made genuine efforts to repay it, and I don't want that obligation hanging over our marriage." Warmth flooded Tabitha's chest at his thoughtfulness. "That would mean so much to him, and to me." Daniel smiled, reaching across the desk to take her hand. "Then it's settled. We'll start our life together with that slate wiped clean." The winter passed in a flurry of preparation, both for the spring calving season and for their wedding. Tabitha ordered fabric from the mercantile and began work on her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation of ivory satin. Mrs. Peterson, who had become something of a surrogate mother to her, offered advice and assistance, her normally gruff manner softening as she helped with the delicate stitching. When spring finally arrived, bringing with it new life across the ranch, preparations for the wedding intensified. The ceremony was to be held on the ranch itself, with Reverend Wallace officiating and guests from Riverdale and the surrounding farms and ranches in attendance. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the prairie adorned with wildflowers that seemed to have bloomed overnight. Tabitha stood at her bedroom window, watching as the last touches were put in place for the afternoon ceremony. Chairs arranged in neat rows near the old oak tree, tables set up for the reception that would follow. A knock at her door preceded Mrs. Peterson's entrance. "Almost time," the older woman said, her usual practicality belied by the misty look in her eyes. "You look beautiful, my dear." Tabitha smoothed the front of her dress, a flutter of nerves and excitement in her stomach. "Do you think he'll like it?" Mrs. Peterson chuckled. "That man would think you beautiful in a potato sack. But yes, he'll be struck dumb when he sees you in that dress." Another knock interrupted them, and to Tabitha's surprise, her father entered looking distinguished in a new suit, his hair neatly trimmed and his face clean-shaven. "Tabby," he breathed, taking in her appearance. "You're the image of your mother on our wedding day." Tabitha felt tears threatening and blinked them away. "I'm so glad you're here, Father." "I wouldn't be anywhere else," Thomas Montgomery assured her, "and I have something for you." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "It was your mother's. She would have wanted you to have it today." Inside the pouch was a delicate gold locket, its surface etched with intricate flowers. When Tabitha opened it, she found a tiny portrait of her mother on one side, the other empty. "For you and Daniel," her father explained, "to continue the tradition." Tabitha's composure finally broke, tears spilling down her cheeks as her father fastened the locket around her neck. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Thank you." Mrs. Peterson discreetly excused herself, leaving father and daughter alone for a moment of quiet reflection before the ceremony. "Ready to be given away?" Thomas asked softly, offering his arm. Tabitha smiled through her tears. "Ready to choose my future," she corrected gently, taking his arm. The ceremony beneath the oak tree was simple but profound. Tabitha would forever remember the look on Daniel's face as she walked toward him on her father's arm, the love in his eyes as they spoke their vows, and the cheers of their friends and neighbors as Reverend Wallace pronounced them husband and wife. "Mrs. Quinn," Daniel murmured against her lips as they sealed their union with a kiss. "Has a nice ring to it." "Indeed it does, Mr. Quinn," Tabitha agreed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the county. As twilight descended, casting long shadows across the land they both loved, Daniel led Tabitha away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the ranch. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist as they watched the first stars appear in the deepening blue of the sky. "More than I ever thought possible," Tabitha answered truthfully, leaning back against his chest. "When I arrived here a year ago, I never imagined this would be my life." Daniel pressed a kiss to her temple. "When you arrived, I was just looking for someone to organize my chaotic papers. Instead, I found the love of my life." Tabitha turned in his arms to face him. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day? You'll work beside me instead." Daniel nodded, his eyes soft with the memory. "Best decision I ever made." "For both of us," Tabitha agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him as the last light of day faded, giving way to the promise of all the tomorrows they would share. In the years that followed, Quinn Ranch flourished under their joint stewardship. Tabitha's business acumen complemented Daniel's practical knowledge of ranching, creating a partnership that was the envy of the county. The arrival of their first child, a daughter with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit, only added to their happiness. Thomas Montgomery, true to his word, continued his steady payments until the debt was fully settled. Free from the burden that had shadowed him for so long, he became a frequent and welcome visitor to the ranch, doting on his granddaughter and eventually moving to Riverdale to be closer to his growing family. And on quiet evenings, when the day's work was done and their children were asleep, Tabitha and Daniel would often sit together on the porch, watching the sunset over the land that had brought them together. In those moments, Tabitha would touch the locket at her throat, now containing portraits of them both, and give thanks for the unexpected journey that had led her home. From a woman sold to work a stranger's fields to the beloved wife, mother, and respected co-owner of Quinn Ranch, Tabitha's life had transformed in ways she could never have predicted. But of all the changes, the greatest was the love she had found with the cowboy who had seen her value from the beginning and asked her to work beside him instead.